The morning light filtered through the blinds as I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my laptop screen. My hand trembled on the trackpad, refreshing the banking page for the fourth time. $28.43. The number blinked back at me, mocking, absurd, impossible. My savings were supposed to cover my move for grad school, a future I'd meticulously planned for years. I grabbed my phone and dialed Mom. She picked up on the second ring, her voice cheery. "Charlotte." "Sweetheart, good morning." "Mom," I began, my voice sharp and trembling. "What happened to my account?" A pause. The kind of pause that makes your stomach twist. "Your account," she repeated, her tone too careful. "My savings account," I said, louder now, almost yelling. "All the money I've been putting away since I was 16. It's gone. Do you know what happened?" Another pause. Then a sigh. "Charlotte, it's not gone. It's been used. For Grace's wedding." I couldn't speak for a moment, the words crashing into me like ice water. "What?" "Look, honey, we didn't have the funds to make the wedding the celebration she deserved," Mom said, her voice soft, as if that would somehow make this better. "It was a family necessity. Grace and Mark are starting their lives together, and—" "A family necessity?" I repeated, my voice shaking. "That was my money, Mom. For grad school. You knew that." "Charlotte, don't be so dramatic," she said, her tone shifting to exasperation. "You're so responsible. I'm sure you'll figure something out. Grace needed this. She only gets one wedding." I clenched the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. "And what about me? My future? What about everything I've been working for?" "Charlotte," Mom said firmly, as if I was a child throwing a tantrum, "this isn't the time to make it about you. Grace is your sister. Family helps family." I stared at the wall, my vision blurring. "You stole from me." "Don't say it like that," she snapped. "We borrowed it. We'll figure out a way to pay you back. But you need to stop being selfish about this." I laughed bitterly, the sound sharp in the silent kitchen. "Selfish? Are you kidding me?" "Charlotte, please," she said, her voice turning pleading. "You don't want to ruin this happy time. We're family, and we need to stick together." I hung up without another word. The betrayal wasn't just in the stolen money. It was in her voice, the expectation that I should just accept it. That I should be okay with being sacrificed for Grace's perfect day. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, the anger bubbling up until I grabbed the nearest chair and shoved it aside. The crash echoed through the apartment. My heart pounded, my chest tight. No, I wasn't going to let them get away with this. My hands shook as I grabbed my keys. It was time to confront them face to face. The drive to my parents' house was a blur. By the time I pulled into their driveway, my hands were trembling, not from fear but from pure, unfiltered rage. The door opened before I could even knock. Grace stood there, wearing a silk robe and holding a glass of what looked like champagne. Her face lit up with that same infuriatingly perfect smile I'd seen plastered all over the wedding invitations. "Charlotte," she chirped. "You're just in time. Mom's making those little quiches you love." I pushed past her, my breath heavy. "Where's Mom and Dad?" Grace blinked, confused, her cheer fading. In the living room." "Good," I snapped, marching through the familiar halls that suddenly felt foreign. I found them exactly where I expected. Mom was rearranging flowers on the coffee table, and Dad was reading the paper, a mug of coffee steaming next to him. They looked up when I entered, and Mom's face instantly fell. "Charlotte," she began, her tone already defensive. "You drained my savings," I said, cutting her off. My voice was low but steady, vibrating with controlled fury. Dad folded his paper. "Now, sweetheart, let's not start this with accusations." "Accusations?" I laughed bitterly. "You stole my money, and you think I'm accusing you of something? That's not just an accusation, that's a fact." Mom sighed, her hands clasping nervously. "Charlotte, please don't make this a scene. We already talked about this on the phone. It was a family decision." "A family decision," I echoed, my voice rising. "What family? The one where I've spent years sacrificing for you? Where I worked through every summer vacation while Grace got to jet off to Italy? Or where I lived on ramen in college while you paid her tuition?" Charlotte, that's not fair, Mom said, her voice tinged with exasperation. You've always been so independent. We didn't think you needed as much help. I turned to Dad, my chest tightening. And you? You're just okay with this? You're supposed to protect me, not let them take everything I've worked for. Dad rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding my gaze. We thought we could make it up to you, kiddo. Grace's wedding was important. Oh, spare me, I spat, my voice trembling. You mean her dream wedding? The designer dress, the ice sculpture, the live band. Tell me, Dad, was the 10-foot flower arch a family necessity, too? Grace appeared in the doorway, her face pale now. Charlotte, stop. You're being dramatic. Mom and Dad didn't mean to hurt you. I wheeled on her. You don't get to talk to me about dramatic, Grace. You've been handed everything on a silver platter while I've had to scrape by for scraps. And now you've taken the one thing I had left. She flinched, and for a moment, I thought she might actually look remorseful. But then she set her jaw. It's not my fault that you're always so uptight about money. If you'd just relax. Relax? I laughed again, the sound sharp and bitter. Relax, when you've never worked a day in your life. When you've had Mom and Dad clean up every mess you've ever made. That's enough. Mom's voice cut through the room, loud and commanding. She stood, her hands trembling. Charlotte, we are your family. We've done everything for you, raised you, supported you. You don't get to talk to us this way. Everything for me? I shouted, my voice cracking. No. You've done everything for Grace. And you've left me to fend for myself. Stop being so ungrateful, Mom snapped. Do you know how much joy Grace's wedding brought this family? You should be proud to have helped make it happen. I stared at her, disbelief flooding me. Joy? You call stealing my future joy? The room fell silent, the weight of my words sinking in. Do you even hear yourselves? I continued, my voice quieter now, laced with something heavier, hurt. You've been reckless for years. Maxing out credit cards, taking loans for things you didn't need. And now you've dragged me into it. You're not just irresponsible, you're selfish. Dad stood then, his face darkening. Watch your tone, young lady. No, I said firmly, my voice steady again. I've watched my tone long enough. I've swallowed my anger, my disappointment, my hurt, and I won't do it anymore. You've taken enough from me. Mom looked at me, her face a mix of anger and something else, maybe guilt, maybe shame. Charlotte, we'll pay you back. I promise. No, I said, shaking my head. You can't pay me back. Because this wasn't just about the money. It's about trust. And you broke it. I grabbed my bag and turned toward the door. You've made it clear where I stand in this family. I'll find my own way, just like I always have. As I walked past Grace, she reached out. Charlotte, wait. I pulled away. Don't. Just don't. The door slammed behind me, and the crisp air outside hit my face like a slap. My heart was pounding, my chest tight, but for the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt free. The idea came to me as I sat in James's tiny studio apartment, the air thick with the smell of burnt coffee and his cluttered mix of sketches and cables. He was pacing, the way he always did when he was excited, his mind spinning faster than his legs could carry him. So let me get this straight, James said, gesturing wildly with a pencil in hand. You want to crash Grace's wedding and expose your family's dirty laundry. Live. Online. I nodded, my jaw tight. Exactly. People need to know what they did, how they stole from me. And they don't get to just pretend everything is perfect. James stopped pacing, his brows furrowing. Charlotte, I'm all for calling out their crap, but this is bold. Are you sure you want to go nuclear? I'm sure, I said, my voice steady. They've always controlled the narrative, James. This time, I'm taking it back. He sighed, flopping onto his worn-out couch. Okay, I'm in. What's the plan? Over the next few days, we mapped out every detail. James, a freelance videographer and aspiring filmmaker, would hide cameras at the venue. He had the tech to live-stream the moment I chose to confront them, ensuring that their picture-perfect facade cracked under the weight of truth. But as the wedding day approached, things got strange. The first message came in the middle of the night. An anonymous email. Don't do this, Charlotte. You'll regret it. The second, the day before the wedding, was a note slipped under my apartment door. Family is sacred. Think twice. Looks like someone's scared, James said when I showed him the note. Good, I replied, but my stomach churned. On the morning of the wedding, I received a call from Dad. It was the first time he'd reached out since our confrontation. Charlotte, he began, his voice unusually soft, I know you're upset. I know you feel like we let you down. You did let me down, Dad, I said bluntly. He sighed heavily. We made a mistake. A big one. But ruining Grace's wedding won't fix it. And what will, Dad? Another empty promise to pay me back? Another excuse about family sacrifice? It's not that simple, he said. We've been under a lot of pressure, financially, emotionally. Your mom's been struggling. I almost laughed. Struggling? You mean while she planned a wedding with a flower budget bigger than my entire savings? There was silence on the other end before he finally said, You're angry, and I understand that. But please, don't do something you can't take back. I hung up without answering. Grace tried next. Her text came through while I was putting on my dress, a sleek, black number I'd chosen deliberately. Grace, I'm sorry for everything, okay? Can we just talk? Please don't ruin this for me. I stared at the message for a long time before typing a reply. Me, you already ruined it for me. By the time I arrived at the venue, my heart was pounding. The elegant garden was dotted with white chairs and a sea of pastel-dressed guests. Grace had spared no expense. Every detail screamed opulence. James was already there, disguised as one of the photographers, his gear blending seamlessly with the others. He gave me a subtle nod as I entered, my heels clicking against the stone path. The ceremony began, picture-perfect as expected. Grace looked radiant, her smile brighter than the chandelier-lit reception hall that followed. And then, during the toasts, I made my move. I stood, champagne glass in hand, and tapped it gently with a fork. The soft clinking drew everyone's attention, their murmurs quieting as I stepped into the spotlight. I'd like to say a few words, I began, my voice steady. James's camera was already trained on me, the live stream rolling. Grace's smile faltered as her eyes met mine. She knew. I'd like to toast my sister Grace and her new husband Mark, I said, my tone dripping with irony. A beautiful couple, celebrating their perfect day. A day paid for, of course, by the sacrifices of others. A ripple of confusion swept through the crowd. Grace's cheeks flushed as she rose from her seat. Charlotte, what are you doing? She hissed. What I should have done a long time ago, I replied, turning to face the guests. You see, this wedding, this entire fantasy, was funded by money stolen from me. My life savings. Every penny I worked for since I was a teenager. Gasps erupted around the room. Charlotte, stop. Mom's voice rang out, panic lacing her words. No, Mom, I said, my voice rising. You don't get to silence me anymore. You stole from me. You betrayed me. And you want me to just sit here and pretend everything is fine. Grace's face crumpled. Charlotte, please. Not here. I locked eyes with her, my anger giving way to something colder. Why not, Grace? This is your day, isn't it? The day you get everything you ever wanted. Again. Enough. Dad's voice boomed, but it was too late. James's live stream was capturing every word, every stunned face in the room. This isn't just about me, I continued, my voice breaking slightly. It's about the way we sweep things under the rug in the name of family. The way we pretend everything's okay while people like me are left to clean up the mess. The room was silent. Finally, I turned to leave, my heart pounding. As I reached the door, I glanced back at Grace, who sat frozen, tears streaming down her face. Enjoy your happily ever after, I said. You paid for it with my future. The door closed behind me, and for the first time in years, I felt free. The air at the wedding was thick with the scent of roses and tension, though only I seemed to notice the latter. Guests sipped champagne under a canopy of twinkling lights, oblivious to the storm brewing just beneath the surface. I stood at the back of the outdoor ceremony, hidden in the shadows as Grace and Mark stood at the altar. Grace looked stunning, her designer gown glittering in the soft glow of the sunset. To everyone here, she was the picture-perfect bride living her fairy tale. My chest tightened. They didn't know what that fairy tale had cost or who had paid for it. As the officiant's voice droned on, I stepped forward, my heels crunching against the gravel. A few heads turned, murmurs spreading like wildfire. I didn't stop until I was at the edge of the aisle. "Excuse me," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The officiant froze mid-sentence. Grace's head whipped toward me, her eyes wide with panic. "Charlotte," she hissed, her voice barely audible. "What are you doing?" "I'm doing what I should have done weeks ago," I replied, stepping fully into the aisle. "I'm telling the truth." Mark frowned, confused, while Grace's cheeks flushed a deep crimson. The guests stared, their murmurs growing louder. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice steady, though my heart raced. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's something you all need to know before the ceremony continues." "Charlotte, stop." Mom's voice came from the front row, sharp and desperate. I ignored her. "This wedding," I continued, sweeping my gaze over the crowd, "this beautiful, extravagant day, was paid for with stolen money. My money. My life savings." The crowd gasped, their whispers turning into a low roar. Grace's face went pale, her perfectly applied makeup doing nothing to hide the shock in her expression. "That's not true." Mom stood, her voice trembling as she tried to maintain control. "Charlotte, you're just upset." "Oh, I'm upset. All right," I snapped, cutting her off. "I worked for years to save that money for grad school. And you decided that Grace's dream wedding was more important than my future." Dad stood now too, his face darkening. "Charlotte, this isn't the time or place." "When would be the right time, Dad?" I shot back. "When you've drained every last bit of me. When Grace has her perfect life, and I'm left with nothing." Grace stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Charlotte, I didn't know. I thought Mom and Dad had everything under control. I didn't know it was your money." "Really, Grace?" I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "You didn't wonder where the extra tens of thousands came from? You didn't care enough to ask?" Tears welled in her eyes as she shook her head. "I didn't mean." "But you benefited from it," I interrupted. "You let them take everything from me so you could have your flower walls and crystal chandeliers." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the band had stopped playing, their instruments hanging limp at their sides. "Is this true?" Mark's voice broke through the quiet, directed at Grace. He looked at her, his face a mix of confusion and anger. "Mark," Grace began, her voice breaking, I didn't know. I thought." "You thought it didn't matter," I said, my voice cutting through her excuses. Tears streamed down her face now. "I'm sorry, Charlotte." "I'm so sorry." But it wasn't just about her anymore. I turned back to the crowd. This family has built its image on lies. They've spent years pretending to be perfect while making me sacrifice everything for them. Well, I'm done sacrificing. The murmurs grew louder as guests exchanged shocked glances, their picture-perfect view of the family unraveling before their eyes. Mom stepped forward, desperation etched on her face. "Charlotte, please. We're family. We can fix this. Just stop." I stared at her, my voice trembling with emotion. "You didn't think about family when you stole from me. You didn't think about me at all. So why should I protect you now?" Grace collapsed into a nearby chair, sobbing openly. Mark stood rigidly at her side, his jaw clenched, while Dad looked like he wanted to disappear into the ground. "I hope it was worth it," I said, my voice quieter now but no less firm. "Because the truth is out. And you can't hide behind your perfect facade anymore." With that, I turned and walked away, the whispers of the crowd following me as I left the ceremony in ruins. The first text came an hour later. "James, it's everywhere. The video's gone viral." By the next morning, the wedding wasn't just the talk of the town, it was a full-blown scandal. Social media was flooded with clips of my speech, headlines screaming about the fairy tale wedding with a dark secret. Grace's tearful confession. Mom's desperate pleas. The cracks in our family laid bare for the world to see. I should have felt vindicated. Maybe in some small way I did. But mostly I felt tired. tired of carrying the weight of their mistakes, tired of being the only one to face the consequences. But as I sat in my tiny apartment that night, scrolling through the headlines, I realized something else. For the first time, the weight wasn't mine alone anymore. The morning after the wedding, I woke up to dozens of notifications buzzing on my phone. The video James had streamed was everywhere, shared, commented on, dissected. Headlines ranged from bride's sister exposes wedding scandal in viral moment to perfect family facade crumbles at lavish ceremony. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry. The first call came from Dad. I let it go to voicemail. By the time I finally listened, his voice was subdued, even remorseful. "Charlotte, it's me, your father," he began, as though I wouldn't recognize him. "Look, I know we've failed you. Not just with the money, but in so many other ways. I don't expect you to forgive us, but I want you to know we're going to make things right." Somehow, the next message was from Mom. Her voice shook as she spoke. "Charlotte, I've been thinking about everything. About how I've let things get out of control. I've made an appointment with a therapist. I need help, and I'm finally ready to admit it. I'm so sorry for the pain I've caused you." I didn't respond to either of them right away. I wasn't ready. Grace showed up at my apartment 2 days later. She looked nothing like the radiant bride from the wedding. Her hair was unkempt, her eyes red and swollen. "I know I'm the last person you want to see," she said, standing awkwardly in my doorway. "You're right," I replied, but I stepped aside to let her in anyway. She sat on the edge of my couch, twisting a tissue in her hands. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," she began. "About how I've taken everything for granted. And you're right. I have. Mom and Dad made it so easy for me to ignore everything because I always got what I wanted." I folded my arms, leaning against the kitchen counter. And I want to change," she said, her voice cracking. "I want to earn your forgiveness, but I know I can't just ask for it. I need to show you I mean it. I'm going to start by paying you back, every cent." Her words caught me off guard. "How?" "I sold the dress," she admitted, her eyes darting to the floor. "And some other things from the wedding. It won't cover everything, but it's a start. I also applied for a job. Mark's parents offered me one at their company, and for once, I didn't let them just give it to me. I'm starting at the bottom." I stared at her, searching her face for signs of insincerity. But she looked genuine. "I appreciate that," I said finally. "But Grace, this isn't just about the money. You need to understand the damage that's been done, not just to me, but to us." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I do. Or at least, I'm trying to. I don't expect us to fix everything overnight, but I'm willing to try if you are." I didn't respond right away. Trust would take time, but maybe this was a start. Over the next few weeks, things began to shift. Slowly, Mom started therapy, and for the first time in my life, I saw glimpses of someone vulnerable beneath her polished exterior. Dad took a hard look at their finances, even consulting a bankruptcy attorney to address their mounting debts. He told me he planned to downsize their house, a step that felt long overdue. As for Grace, she threw herself into her new job. She called me once a week, giving updates and asking how I was doing. I didn't always pick up, but when I did, our conversations felt different, less strained. And me? I decided I couldn't let the experience go to waste. One night, James and I sat in his apartment, brainstorming ideas over takeout. "Family financial abuse isn't just about money," I said, swirling a fork in my lo mein. "It's about control. About manipulation. And people don't talk about it enough." James nodded, gesturing with a spring roll. "So, what do we do? Blog? YouTube channel?" "Bigger," I said, a spark of determination in my chest. "A foundation. For people who've gone through what I have. To give them resources, legal help, even financial education." He grinned. "I like it. Got a name in mind?" I thought for a moment, then smiled. "The Phoenix Fund. For people who've been burned but rise anyway." James raised his spring roll in a mock toast. "To the Phoenix Fund." To the Phoenix Fund, I echoed, my chest swelling with something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The scandal didn't disappear overnight, and the wounds in my family would take years to heal. But something had shifted. The lies were out in the open, and for the first time, so was the truth. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing: I was done being a victim. This was my story now, and I was going to write it on my terms. The air was cool as I stepped into the community center for the first family therapy session. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly, and the faint smell of coffee lingered from a pot brewing in the corner. I didn't know what to expect, and I wasn't sure how this was supposed to fix years of damage. But I was here. And so were they. Mom sat stiffly in the circle of chairs, her perfectly manicured hands folded tightly in her lap. Dad looked down at the floor, as though avoiding eye contact might make this whole thing easier. Grace sat beside them, her usual polished exterior replaced by something quieter, humbler. The therapist, a woman with kind eyes and a clipboard, began. "Thank you all for being here," she said, her voice gentle. "I know this isn't easy, but it's a start. Today, we'll focus on listening, truly listening to each other. Let's begin with Charlotte." The room fell silent, all eyes turning to me. I took a deep breath, my fingers gripping the edge of my chair. "I'm here because I want things to change," I began. "But I need you all to understand how much you hurt me. When you took my savings, it wasn't just money, it was trust. It was years of hard work and sacrifice that you dismissed like it didn't matter." Mom flinched, her lips pressing into a thin line. I didn't realize how deeply it would hurt you," she said quietly. "At the time, it felt like we didn't have a choice. But I see now that we were wrong." "I was wrong." Dad nodded, his voice gruff when he spoke. "We got caught up in trying to hold everything together, and in doing that, we tore you apart." "I'm sorry, Charlotte." "I really am." I studied them both, searching their faces for signs of sincerity. This wasn't an instant fix, but hearing those words I'd longed for, was a start. Grace cleared her throat, her voice shaky. "I've been selfish," she admitted. "I've taken so much for granted. I see that now, and I don't want to be that person anymore. I want to earn your trust back, Charlotte. I know it'll take time, but I'm willing to put in the work." For the first time in months, the anger in my chest loosened its grip. "I appreciate that," I said, my voice softer now. "But this isn't just about me. If we want to move forward, we all need to commit to being honest about everything. No more secrets. No more lies." The therapist nodded, her eyes warm. "Honesty is the foundation of trust. And trust is what rebuilds relationships." Over the next few weeks, things began to shift. Therapy became a weekly ritual, and though the sessions weren't always easy, sometimes they were downright painful, they were helping. Mom opened up about the pressure she'd felt to maintain the family's image. Dad admitted his struggles with denial about their financial reality. Grace spoke about how she'd felt trapped by their expectations, using her privilege to shield herself from the consequences. And me? I learned to let go of some of my anger. Not all of it, it wasn't that simple, but enough to see the people behind the pain. One afternoon, Grace called me out of the blue. "Hey," she said hesitantly. "I wanted to let you know I saw the announcement about the Phoenix Fund. It's amazing, Charlotte. What you're doing, it's going to help so many people." "Thanks," I said, surprised by the warmth in her voice. "I want to help," she added quickly. "Even if it's just small stuff. Filing, answering emails, whatever you need." I hesitated, the memory of her complicity still raw. But then I realized, this was her way of making amends. "Okay," I said finally. "We'll start small." She laughed, the sound lighter than I'd heard in years. "Small works for me." Months later, the family sat together at a small charity event hosted by the Phoenix Fund. Mom and Dad had reluctantly agreed to speak, sharing their story about the dangers of financial irresponsibility and the toll it takes on relationships. "I thought I was protecting my family," Dad said, his voice steady as he addressed the crowd. "But in reality, I was putting a Band-Aid on a wound that needed stitches. If I've learned anything, it's that honesty, no matter how hard, is always the better path." The room erupted in applause, and for the first time, I saw pride in his eyes when he looked at me. After the event, Mom pulled me aside. "I'm proud of you, Charlotte," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You've turned something so painful into something so powerful." "Thanks, Mom," I said, the words surprisingly easy to say. Grace joined us then, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Okay," she said, handing one to me with a grin. "I admit it. You were always the smart one." "Glad you finally noticed," I teased, a small smile tugging at my lips. The road ahead wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy. There were still moments of frustration, of doubt, of hurt. But for the first time, we weren't pretending to be a perfect family. We were just us. Imperfect, messy, and trying. And that was enough.